Okay. All right. So let's get started. So good afternoon, and thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak with you today about what to do now, establishing a new baseline with the impacts of federal funding cuts and more. My name is Carlton T. Mayers II, Esquire, and I'm a national expert on community development and safety. And I'm also the CEO, founder, and owner of Mayor Strategic Solutions, LLC, where our motto is, as you can see on the slide, the process reflects the outcome, not a one-size-fits-all approach. So just a little bit of background on me. I'm going to give it a little bit of time for the slide to come up. But while it's doing that, I used to direct NAACP National's Criminal Justice Reform Program for the whole country. While I was in that role, I co-authored NAACP National's Born Suspect Ending Racial Profiling Report. After that, I transitioned to NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund Incorporated, where that's Thurgood Marshall's law firm, where I was the policy counsel for the policing reform campaign. In this role, I worked on both the Ferguson, Missouri and Baltimore, Maryland consent decrees, from negotiation through implementation. I also lobbied on the Hill for federal policing reform legislation, a lot of which is now incorporated in the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. And I also did at least 5 years of work, respectively, with NAACP National and NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund with President Barack Obama's administration and with his DOJ on a series of policing reform and community development initiatives around the country, most notably the 21st Century Policing Task Force Report recommendations. And so now through my consulting company, Mayor Strategic Solutions, LLC, I use my over 15 years of experience as a community lawyer to assist communities nationwide to solve community development and safety challenges by using the CAP method, which stands for C for community empowerment, A for accountability, and T for transparency. With the CAP method, I work with communities across the country to identify, strategize, and implement long-term and constructive changes in practices, policies, and cultures. And Ashanti already detailed some of the work I've been doing in Kalamazoo with all of you, specifically on the open database. So you've already seen how the CAP method plays out when it comes to that resolution and its implementation. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. And so as you can see here on the slide, what we're here to talk about today are the challenges when it comes to the federal funding and more. So let's start off with talking about the challenges with the federal funding as it relates specifically to the U.S. Department of Justice, also called the DOJ. So we're going to focus right now on this slide on fiscal year 2024 to fiscal year 2025. So that's last year when Biden and Harris were in the White House working with their Congress, going into this year where now we have the Trump administration and J.D. Vance working with their Congress, okay? So the U.S. Department of Justice, DOJ, has canceled hundreds of ongoing grants that funded everything from mental health care for police officers to support programs for victims of crime and sexual assault. Over $800 million in DOJ grants for local gun violence prevention and crime reduction were canceled in April of this year. This included 373 grant awards to over 550 organizations across 48 states, many of which were subrecipients providing reentry services, including case management, job training, and support for nonviolent offenders. Of the $800 million, approximately $500 million belongs specifically to programs aimed at gun violence intervention and community-based public safety initiatives. Roughly $158 million in violence intervention-focused grants and $8.6 million for research and evaluation were cut as well. These sweeping cuts have disrupted hospital-based violence programs, youth initiatives, and data-informed intervention strategies in cities nationwide. However, the affected grantees have been informed by the DOJ of a 30-day window to appeal its decisions. And so what we have right now is, like I said, fiscal year 2024, that was last year. We had Biden and Harris that had already designated money for several different initiatives and this money went towards organizations, it went to municipalities and other localities. It also went to states, and it was funding a lot of the stuff I just talked about. Now, that happened last year, and they made sure that that money was designated by December of last year. Now, January of this year, we have a new president, right? New vice president. Now we're working with a different kind of Congress, and they have a different agenda, a different view looking forward. And so what they've done is they've essentially clawed back the money that was already designated to organizations, municipalities, and states. And what they're saying is, if you want the money, you're going to have to file an appeal. And during the appeal, we will evaluate and determine if the money is going to be in line with the Trump administration's agenda. If it is, we will give you the money back or give you the money. If it's not, then we're not going to give you the money. Okay. And so the 30-day appeals decision, what I've been hearing is that some organizations who filed an appeal have heard back within that 30-day time period. Most of them have not. But the ones who have, some of them have received the money. Other ones have not received any money or have not heard back at all. And so the money is just not coming in. So that's where we're at. The money was there last year. This year, it's been taken back under evaluation, and they're going to determine if it's in line with the Trump agenda or not. If it is, you get the money. If it's not, you're not getting the money. Okay. So now we're still in fiscal year 2024 to 2025. So once again, Biden and Harris last year, Trump and J.D. Vance this year. So additionally, the Trump administration has targeted federal health and research outlets, including the CDC's Division of Violence Prevention and school-based mental health programs, totaling hundreds of millions in cuts. Meanwhile, the dedicated White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention, established in 2023, was disbanded promptly after President Trump took office in January of this year. And the White House's January 27, 2025 Office of Management and Budget grant pause memo put roughly 2,600 federal financial assistance programs on hold, affecting many grants used by local nonprofits, food pantries, youth programs, senior services, and more. Likewise, AmeriCorps lost over $547 million in state and national grants, impacting 35,000 Corps members and essentially dismantling support for food pantries, after-school programs, and disaster response. On top of this, Job Corps is in the process of officially being eliminated, and it is currently not operating at full capacity. So like I said, this was money that was designated last year by Biden and Harris with their Congress so that it could be used this year by states, municipalities, and by organizations. And now this new administration of Trump and J.D. Vance and their Congress is saying, we're going to put the brakes on that. We're going to take that money back and determine if you're doing it the way we want. If not, you don't get the money. We get rid of the programming. If so, we will allow for it. So you see they're getting rid of AmeriCorps programming, Job Corps, etc. Now we're going to transition our conversation from looking at what happened from last year, fiscal year 2024, when Biden and Harris were in the White House, to this year, fiscal year 2025, with now Trump and J.D. Vance. Now we're going to transition to fiscal year 2025, which is this year, going into fiscal year 2026, which is next year. Both years are going to be under the Trump J.D. Vance administration. It's important to highlight that. So as you can see here on the slide, the White House fiscal year 2026 proposed budget, which was published about a month or so ago, includes a decrease of $823 million for state and local grant programs from 2025 enacted level through an array of reduction and eliminations targeting unnecessary, wasteful, and ineffective programs, according to the Trump administration. State and local grant programs will be directly linked to combating violent crime, protecting American children, supporting American victims of trafficking and sexual assault, and better coordinating law enforcement efforts at all levels of government. Okay, I want to highlight that. We're going to talk about that in a minute. So overall, these reductions represent a significant rollback of federal support for state and local efforts. These cuts have and will continue to directly impact violence prevention funding, youth and senior services, food assistance, reentry services, mental health supports in communities nationwide. And I want to hone in on the bottom of that second bullet, the one that you see is emboldened there in the second bullet. So you see in the beginning, it says state and local grant programs will be directly linked to, and then at the end, better coordinating law enforcement efforts at all levels of government. Okay, so this shows a reversal of the movement from 5 years ago during the George Floyd Breonna Taylor protests to substantially reduce the number of contacts. That's what came out of the protest 5 years ago, was to substantially reduce the number of contacts between law enforcement and civilians, and instead have people that are not law enforcement, like gun violence interventionists, mental health professionals, etc., who could then intervene, be the first ones on the scene to engage with people rather than armed law enforcement. And so by doing that, reducing those contacts and hopefully reducing any kind of excessive use of force or any kind of negative incident that will come out of that. And instead invest more in positive contacts, like law enforcement getting to know their community members, law enforcement working with their community members on solving public safety challenges, law enforcement playing basketball with youth in the community, etc. So instead of investing in that, now we're moving away from that. And instead, we're looking at increasing the number of contacts between law enforcement and civilians. And these are not going to be the positive contacts I just mentioned. These are going to instead be increased negative contacts, okay? And so, for instance, we're talking about ICE engaging with neighbors as they're dragging away somebody who they believe is here illegally, and their neighbors in the community are saying, no, no, don't take them away, and they're grabbing at ICE. That can result in potential excessive use of force by ICE law enforcement on civilians. We also know that National Guard and protesters and pedestrians, we have National Guard being sent to all these cities around the country, and either they're monitoring on the streets in general and also stopping and questioning people, even though they're not supposed to do that, or they're guarding federal property, like federal buildings and parks that are typically open to the public to be able to walk around, but now they're being used as law enforcement over those specific kinds of federal properties. And then we also have the Department of Homeland Security, right? We've seen them engaging with everybody. If it has to do with raids, if it has to do with arrests or even traffic stop checkpoints, or just stopping people and questioning them while they're outside of their stoop, just hanging out at night, they're being used to engage with people on all levels. And in addition to this, we've also seen encouragement from the federal government for state and local police to engage in immigration enforcement, okay? So everything I just talked about, we're already seeing this. Just look at Los Angeles. Just look at DC. And look at potentially Chicago, Baltimore, New Orleans, etc. So when we talk about what is state and local grant programs that will be directly linked to better coordinating law enforcement efforts at all levels of government, that's what we are currently seeing. So it's already being played out, and fiscal year 2026 hasn't even started. It actually begins on the federal level on October 1st of this year, next month. So the money is already there, and it's about to be given to law enforcement around the country to engage in more of these activities. So it's something to highlight. All right, so as you can see here on this slide, we have the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. So now we're going to transition from fiscal year 2026. We're going to focus now fiscal year 2025 to fiscal year 2026 and ultimately fiscal year 2027. We're talking about the One Big Beautiful Act that was signed into law a couple of months ago. So the One Big Beautiful Act, enacted on July 4th of this year, slashes federal funding across major social safety networks. It also makes sweeping cuts that reduce support for programs often accessed by youth and low-income families, including in Michigan. And even though there's no line item within it specifically on gun violence or youth services, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act does include information on, for instance, an over $1.2 trillion in Medicaid and SNAP cuts over a decade, including reduced provider taxes, new work requirements, and tightened eligibility, and increased costs for enrollees. It also includes withholding around $7 billion in previously appropriated education funding, which could affect youth programs and school-linked services. It also includes deep cuts to Medicaid provider tax credits, which is a key funding mechanism for health and social services. Additionally, it will provide for broader threats to services accessed by youth, victims, and low-income populations via reduced health, nutrition, and student support. Now, I think it's also important to highlight that all of this translates into potential downstream reductions for youth health programs, after-school services, mental health supports, and family nutrition in Kalamazoo and other parts of Michigan. Now, one other thing to highlight here, the last bullet there, is that the One Big Beautiful Bill Act provides over $75 billion, okay, I'm gonna say that again, not million, $75 billion for ICE to become the largest law enforcement agency in the US, even rivaling the size of other countries' militaries, like Israel's military. It'll even be larger than that military. So like I said earlier, we're gonna see an expansion and an increase in the contacts of law enforcement and civilians, and it will not be positive contacts. So we just got to understand this is where we're at and also where we're going. One other thing that's important to highlight here is, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act is the largest piece of legislation on the federal level that's ever passed into law. It's also the most expensive. And so because of that, there are a series of provisions within it that go into effect at different times. So I'm just going to kind of touch on what we've talked about thus far. When do those provisions go into effect? So for instance, when it comes to the spending and safety net cuts to like Medicaid, SNAP, education, those provisions go into effect as of the beginning of fiscal year 2026, which I mentioned earlier, is next month, October 1st of this year. Okay, so that's going to happen right around the corner. And so most major spending reductions begin with the new federal fiscal year immediately after enactment. The impact this will have is reductions to Medicaid provider taxes, like I said earlier, new work requirements and stricter SNAP eligibility rules, which will start in late 2025, which is right around now, and be phased in through 2026, next year. This is important because these cuts cascade into state budgets. For instance, Michigan Department of Human and Health Services, Michigan Schools, and Michigan Youth Services. And this will happen by 2026. So by the end of next year, all of this is going to be in full effect. As it relates to the Department of Justice funding being canceled, like for instance, the funding that goes towards community violence intervention, victim services, youth violence prevention, etc. Those provisions under the One Big Beautiful Bill Act went into effect the same day that the One Big Beautiful Bill Act was enacted, which was the 4th of July of this year. And so those cuts have now been officially canceled, okay, under this legislation. So what that looks like nationally is about $811 million from the DOJ to go to states, municipalities, and organizations. Specifically from Michigan, that looks like $4.5 million that was designated for Michigan to go towards these efforts, that now that funding has been canceled. Within weeks of the bill becoming law, that all happened. Now, this is important because this is why Michigan community violence intervention and youth program nonprofits already reported sudden layoffs and cancellations during this summer that we're finishing up right now this year. Now, one other thing to highlight is the ARPA, the American Repair Plan that was after COVID, the money that was issued by the federal government. Now, even though that's not a part of the One Big Beautiful Bill, it does connect to it. And that's very important for Kalamazoo, because I believe Kalamazoo City and County is still utilizing ARPA funds going into next year. So let's talk about that a little bit. So the obligation deadline for the for ARPA funds, and that means like when you were supposed to say, okay, we're going to use the money for this purpose, was actually December 31st of last year, 2024. So that deadline has passed now. So the ARPA funds for Kalamazoo have already been obligated. We're going to use it for this purpose. And don't forget, the Biden administration allowed for flexibility for how the ARPA funds could be used. It didn't only have to be used for COVID-related issues. It could also be used to address gun violence, to address issues with housing, to address education, etc. All right. So what's happened now is that under the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, it has now removed the flexibility, replacement flexibility that the Biden administration provided, meaning that you can only use the ARPA funds for whatever it's supposed to be used for, not for other things that are not directly related to what it's supposed to be used for. And that's a problem because the ARPA funds have to be spent down by December 31st of 2026. So we have December 31st of next year, a little bit over a year, when the deadline is for all the ARPA money to be spent. Whatever's not spent, the federal government will take back. Now, what's happened under the One Big Beautiful Bill Act is that now under the Trump administration, they've said, well, we're not going to wait until December 31st of 2026 to see who hasn't spent the money and then take it back. We are actually going to start taking the money back before that if we believe that the money that's being spent is not being spent on things in line with the Trump administration's agenda. If, for instance, is being spent to support immigration legal aid, things like that, then they will take back the money way before the December 31st deadline. And they might even take it back even if it's spent on gun violence intervention, right? So, you know, it's just highlighting that the money right now that the city and county of Kalamazoo have for ARPA, they're really going to have to start planning now when they're going to spend that money down way before the December 31st, 2026 deadline, or potentially get that money clawed back by the Trump administration before they were planning on having it spent, meaning that whatever the money, whatever work is relying on that money, the work may not get completed because the money may not be there to complete it. So that's something to think about going forward. All right. Now what we're going to do is, I'm going to give this about 10 seconds, but I'll talk in a bit. I know I just kind of give like a global perspective or insight as to what's going on with the federal funding. Let's now hone in and focus specifically on your community, Kalamazoo, Michigan. Okay. So U.S. Department of Justice, the federal funding that relates to gun violence prevention and intervention. So as you can see here on the slide, Michigan nonprofits lost about $4.5 million in federal DOJ grant funding, particularly hurting community violence intervention, substance abuse programs, hate crime prevention, and arts programs for youth in the justice system. Also, many CVI, community violence intervention, and youth programs funded through the Department of Justice saw immediate shortfalls, such as layoffs, program pauses, with ripple effects on shooting interruption, hospital-based programs, etc. So Michigan nonprofits have already warned that these losses will cost lives and roll back progress in violence prevention. So you can see here on the slide, the second bullet, community-based outreach programs in Kalamazoo could be threatened. And also the third bullet, loss of operational continuity and future planning capacity. So who specifically in Michigan or in Kalamazoo could be impacted by this? Okay, so like I said, I did the research. I'm gonna let you know, it was not easy to find information on Kalamazoo. It was easier to find it on the state of Michigan. So just kind of understand the information I'm providing. I wasn't able to get everything that I needed, but I'm hoping that this is enough that you can then use the information and move forward in whatever fashion you need to. So number one, who will be impacted by this is the Kalamazoo Department of Public Safety, okay, your law enforcement agency, KDPS. So KDPS is a core partner in a U.S. federal grant that amounts to about $1.25 million from the Michigan Commission on Law Enforcement Standards, also called MCOLS. And this is to fund a multi-agency community violence intervention initiative. This program focuses on law enforcement interventions as well as outreach and education events based on data-driven strategies. KDPS is central to coordination efforts alongside local nonprofits. Also, who will be directly impacted is Griffin Place. As the lead community-based intervention programming under MCOLS grant, Griffin Place connects individuals at risk of violence with essential resources, counseling, and community supports. This includes restorative justice and suicide prevention interventions. Additionally, who will be impacted is the Michigan Transformation Collective, MTC, also funded under the same MCOLS grant. MTC facilitates the Health Alliance for Violence Initiative, or the Health Alliance for Violence Intervention, also called HAVI, H-A-V-I, convenings. This supports hospital-based intervention strategies via technical assistance and stakeholder coalitions. Now, we're still talking about the U.S. Department of Justice funding, but instead of gun violence intervention, we're now going to shift over to impact on at-risk youth and youth programs. And so, as you can see here on the slide, school-based mental health and youth support programs will be losing funding. For example, youth-focused diversion and violence intervention programs have been halted in Lansing and Detroit, Michigan. And the Department of Justice have already told grantees that they cannot use DOJ grants for most immigration-related legal aid, even retroactively. So like even before they put that statement out, whatever you did before, it's not going to count. You cannot have that money, even if you have already said you're going to devote it towards something in advance of them putting out this statement. So in addition to this, when we talk about mentoring and after-school programs, mentorship slots could be lost due to grant cuts. When we talk about juvenile diversion and reentry, potentially fewer youth will be supported annually through juvenile diversion and reentry. So who will definitely be impacted by these particular cuts in Kalamazoo? Number one, the Kalamazoo courts, right? That's who right now is providing a lot of that juvenile diversion and reentry programming, as well as the prosecutor's office. And in addition to that, we also have the group violence intervention known as GVI. This is funded through the DOJ Project Safe Neighborhoods, also known as PSN. Through the DOJ's Project Safe Neighborhoods program, Kalamazoo has long supported a group violence intervention, GVI initiative. GVI focuses on interrupting violence among at-risk youth / gang-involved individuals through community outreach and law enforcement collaboration. All right. And now we're going to still focused on U.S. Department of Justice funds. We're going to now talk about victim services, right? Those who are victims of crime. There's money that the federal government provides to organizations, states, and localities for this purpose. What's going to happen with that? And so, as you can see here on the slide, Victims of Crime Act, also known as VOCA, that's a federal law. This provides victim service funds, which now face new strings attached and restrictions attached to them. States are suing the DOJ over immigration enforcement conditions that could shrink or even withhold the VOCA dollars. So they're trying to attach immigration, like you see here, that the DOJ grants for most immigration-related legal aid, that they're not able to provide those funds for that purpose. And so now that they're attaching those conditions to Victims of Crime Act, that's now causing issues to organizations that have been providing that kind of support. They're now losing that money or it's shrinking. Who will definitely be impacted by that in Kalamazoo, or potentially be impacted, is the Kalamazoo County Prosecuting Attorney's Office. They have a Victim Advocate Specialist program. So the Prosecuting Attorney's Office has received VOCA funding for over 20 years to support its Victim Advocate Specialist role. This full-time position delivers crucial services such as court support, emotional stabilization, and victim rights advocacy for individuals impacted by crimes, including domestic violence. Additionally, the Kalamazoo County Prosecutor's Office also has the Crime Victim Rights Project, operating under the Crime Victim Assistant Grant supported by VOCA. This project funds approximately 2.5 full-time equivalent victim advocates. They provide rights notifications, restitution assistance, and support throughout the justice process. And additionally, there also might be some nonprofits in Kalamazoo, such as the YWCA, who could also be impacted by these. And so you could expect cuts and clawbacks of this money. Anybody in Kalamazoo who has received money through VOCA for victim services funds, if you're using that money to do something that is not in line with the Trump administration agenda, for instance, supporting immigration-related legal aid, then more than likely they're going to take that money back, and then they're going to cut it going forward. So just be on the lookout for that. Okay, now we're talking about not just the DOJ, but also the White House. And this is about something we're all familiar with. The ARPA funds, right? The America Rescue Plan Act and state and local fiscal recovery funds. So ARPA, SLFRF funds. These are the funds that were provided by the Biden administration after COVID. And so this was for us to recover after COVID. So right now we're facing a funding cliff. What does that mean? So the ARPA funds are going to be sunsetting fairly soon, as we talked about a bit earlier. So the projects that have been propped up by ARPA, for instance, like community violence intervention, shelter expansion, outreach teams, small business aid in Kalamazoo, all face fiscal year 2025 to 2026 gaps. Don't forget that begins next month, October 1st, unless the locals replace the dollars, okay? So that's why I was saying this is something I would prioritize in Kalamazoo, because this money might be running out a lot sooner than December 31st of next year. So as it relates directly to the Community Violence Intervention Program and Youth Services, the city of Kalamazoo and the county of Kalamazoo are actively using ARPA resources to bolster gun violence prevention and youth safety interventions. Now, specifically, they are using ARPA funds to fund the Summer Program Fund, which explicitly supports youth-related programming. They are also using the ARPA funds for housing and support services like investments in shelters and youth organizations, funding signal cross-cutting support for services that support at-risk families. And so when we think about who could be directly impacted by this funding cliff, where December 31st of next year, the money has to be spent down and it might get recouped or clawed back before then by the Department of Treasury, because now the One Big Beautiful Bill Act allows for that, if the Department of Treasury believes that you're using the money for something that is not in line with the Trump administration agenda. So seeing that that's what the case is, potentially this could impact Michigan and definitely Kalamazoo. Who is this going to impact directly in Kalamazoo? Okay, so we have the city of Kalamazoo and we have the county of Kalamazoo. Both of them, the Kalamazoo City Commission and the Kalamazoo County Commission jointly allocated over $1 million in ARPA funds toward the Community Violence Intervention, CVI efforts. This investment supports outreach, prevention, and intervention strategies to address gun violence. Additionally, the city of Kalamazoo, like I mentioned already, has the summer program fund. So the city of Kalamazoo dedicated almost $700,000 of ARPA grant funding to establish the summer program fund. This fund supports youth programming and summer access services, aligning with efforts to reduce youth vulnerability and enhance safety. Now, there's a number of organizations that are working under the summer program fund in Kalamazoo who are all receiving funding through ARPA to do the work for the summer program fund. I'm gonna list out some of those orgs now. So one of them is COPE Network when it comes to building connections. The other one is On Track Residential Treatment Unit. This is a Kalamazoo County juvenile home. The other one is the prosecutor's office. We know that already, specifically for their victim advocates program. Then there's also the Tri-Share Child Care Program. And there's also Kid Network, KYD, Kid Network. And then there's the Boys and Girls Clubs of Greater Kalamazoo. There's also Prevention Works. Then there's the Community Healing Centers. Then there's also the Catholic Charities Dioceses of Kalamazoo, specifically the Bridges Counseling Program. And then there's also the Integrated Services Kalamazoo, which is known as ISK. And so in addition to all of this, Kalamazoo County and City is using ARPA funds, or are using ARPA funds for expanded youth and housing investments. So for instance, in a recent Kalamazoo City Commission discussion, this was from July of this year, it was reported that Kalamazoo committed $33 million in ARPA funds toward housing and youth programming, which includes a landmark $500,000 investment in a new family shelter and support for over 30 organizations focused on addressing youth safety and violence prevention. So like I said, the deadline is coming up, December 31st of 2026, next year, but because of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, the Department of Treasury can say, we don't think that you're using that money the right way. And so we're going to take it back before the December 31st, 2026 deadline so that you don't even spend all the money, which means whatever programming you have that's relying on it could potentially lose its funding before the programming is supposed to be completed. So it's important that Kalamazoo community stakeholders and government officials start to establish some kind of a timeline and start thinking about how you can spend that money down sooner than December 31st of 2026. Now, like we just talked about the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, still staying on that vein of thought. As you could see here, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act impacts Medicaid, impacts SNAP, impacts education, etc. Medicaid, Michigan stands to lose between $2 billion and $4 billion annually due to reduced federal support in Medicaid and SNAP programs. Projections estimate that over 500,000 people in Michigan may lose Medicaid access in the coming decade due to policy changes in the One Big Beautiful Act. Some 168,000 seniors who rely on Medicaid for long-term care could be left without options if eligibility or funding is cut. Additionally, when it comes to school-based mental health, there's a good chance that school counselor positions could be cut, threatened and cut. So you'll have fewer school counselors. And also additional pressure placed on Kalamazoo nonprofits and food providers. Now, as it relates to food providers and specifically talking about SNAP and nutrition assistance, in addition to education, Michigan faces a $900 million SNAP reduction. SNAP cuts increase food insecurity among youth served by these programs, and the Universal Free School Meal Program is also at risk. And so a number of students could potentially lose access to free and reduced cost meals, which means you might get fewer students showing up to school, because we know that a lot of students show up to school just to get those free meals, right? Because they're not getting it at home. So if they can't get it at school, then it's going to be hard for them to want to go to school and stay focused and try to achieve academically. So that's something that could be a consequence of this. Something else as it relates to education, as I mentioned earlier, nationally, there's going to be, under the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, a withholding of around $7 billion in previously appropriated education funding nationwide, which could affect youth programs and schools-linked services. What this means is that to backfill obligations like state Medicaid, cost sharing, SNAP responsibilities, and education by 2032, the year 2032, Michigan will need to find $1.1 billion in general fund cuts. Okay, they're going to have to start cutting from their general fund starting in fiscal year 2026, which we already know begins next month, October 1st of 2025. Okay, and they're going to have to do this in order to address the shortfalls and gaps in Medicaid, SNAP, education, etc. So the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, even though we may not be seeing it immediately, we're going to be seeing the effects of it really soon, as of the end of this year and definitely next year in Michigan and in Kalamazoo. All right, so I know I'm transitioning to the next slide now. So we just talked about the federal funding cuts. We talked about how it's going to, relate to Kalamazoo. I also want to bring up just a couple of other points that are important for us to understand where are we at now going into next year as it relates to community development and safety in this country. So as you can see here on this slide, this is a bar graph from mappingpoliceviolence.com. This is based on information from www.mappingpoliceviolence.org. That's an organization that came out of Campaign Zero, and they collect this data on people killed by police every year. And so this data you see in this bar graph, this spans from 2013 to 2024, and it shows the number of civilians killed by police for each year. Now, as you can see on the slide, it says 1,074 people were killed by police in 2013, and which is when the data was first collected, and 1,376 people were killed by police in 2024. That's last year. That's almost a third of an increase, 28%. That's almost a third, okay, of an increase in people killed by police nationwide from 2013 to 2024. That's an 11-year span. The number of people being killed by law enforcement is on an upward trend, and it has gone up almost 30% in that time period, okay? And the highest number of people killed by law enforcement was actually last year, 2024, okay? Which amounted to 17 more people than were killed in the year prior to that, 2023, which was 1,359. 2024's numbers, as I said earlier, is 1,376. So understand from 2020 to 2024, who was in the White House? Biden and Harris, okay? And they advanced a lot of policing reform and police accountability initiatives through the DOJ. And so even with all the work they did, with consent decrees, et cetera, the numbers of law enforcement killing civilians nationwide was still going up, and going up to the highest number ever, last year's number, okay? So if that's where we are now, what does that mean going forward under this administration, where they're saying we want to increase the contacts between law enforcement and civilians, and not positive contacts, negative contacts? So one other thing I want to highlight here is this is what you're seeing here. This data is from the Washington, www.washingtonpost.com. And so you can see on the left-hand side of the slide, this is these are police killings demographics from 2015 to 2024, okay? And you can see on the left-hand bar graph here of the slide that Black Americans are killed by police at more than twice the rate of white Americans. What does that mean? Well, if you can see, Black Americans, so that's 6.1 per million per year, are killed by law enforcement, compared to white non-Hispanics, who are killed at 2.4 per million per year. Okay, so that's almost 3 times the rate. Now, what's interesting about it is when you look at the numbers on that, you have 4,657 people who are white, non-Hispanic, that have been killed by law enforcement from 2015 to 2024, compared to 2,484 Black Americans who were killed by law enforcement in that same time period. So how is there an issue around racial disparity if there's more white non-Hispanic Americans being killed than Black Americans? Well, we also have to take into consideration what is the overall number, or what are the percentages of each population for the overall population. So we know that Black Americans consist of about anywhere from 12 to 14% of the overall US population compared to white Americans who consist of more than 50%, okay? More than half of the overall US population. So when we look at, the number of white non-Hispanic Americans that have been killed by law enforcement from 2015 till last year, it makes sense that out of all the numbers, which, all of these numbers total about 10,430 victims, 4,657, that's close to half, right? So that number is about right with where the overall population is for white non-Hispanic Americans. However, when we look at the number of African Americans, Black Americans that have been killed in that same time period, as you can see on the right-hand side of the screen there, like I said, 100% of the victims for that time period is 10,430. 27% of that 100%, that amounts to 2,494 victims, are Black Americans. And of that 27%, 26%, that's 2,406 victims, are Black American males. That's men and boys. Okay? So that means that only 1% of the people that have been killed by law enforcement during 2015 to 2024 were Black women. And 26% were Black men. And overall, for all Black Americans, was 27%. Okay, so when you look at overall Black Americans, we consist of 12 to 14% of the overall population. That's people that are not killed and people that are killed by law enforcement. Okay, when it comes to just people that are killed by law enforcement, out of the 100% of those victims that are killed, 27% are Black Americans. So 12% overall, 27% those that are killed by law enforcement. How does that make any sense? That means that the people killed are larger than the actual population. That's a racial disparity, okay? That's why it doesn't make sense. That is a racial disparity. And that means that there's something going on. There's an underlying issue that is not getting addressed when we're seeing, like on the previous slide, there's an uptrend in law enforcement killing people. Doesn't matter what race you are in this country. But when every year, at least 25% of those people that are killed are Black Americans, and we're seeing an uptrend in that, that means there's an underlying issue not being addressed. And that means consent decrees, pattern of practice investigations are not going to cut it. We need something more than that. And so, like I said, this is where we are now. Now we're going into a transition with this new administration where they want to expand upon negative contacts with law enforcement. So what I'm saying is this: these numbers that you're looking at now, in my opinion, are only going to get worse. Just looking at, what's happening and what's being said by the federal government. So just keep that in mind. We're not in a good position that we're starting from. So going forward, it's probably not going to get better. Now, just one other point, just two other points I want to just really quickly bring up with you, why this is important and when we talk about community development and safety. So there was a sociological study that was done in 2016 that showed that immediately following and for more than a year after the highly publicized assault or death of a Black person at the hands of law enforcement, Black Americans are less likely to dial 911. Now, I would say that it even goes beyond Black Americans. I think that this is just the way people are, Americans. You remember 5 years ago when everybody was stuck in their apartments and their houses because of COVID, and every day, what were you seeing on the TV? You were seeing that knee on the neck. You were seeing George Floyd saying, he wanted to see his mother, etc. You were hearing about Breonna Taylor, seeing her picture. And so with all of that constant visualization, Americans in general just started losing confidence and trust in law enforcement. And that's one reason why law enforcement is struggling now to staff up and retain staff. And so what I believe is that when people in general see a group of people brutalizing and harassing another group of people, they're probably not going to trust that group of people that are brutalizing and harassing others. So that means if there's a violent crime that occurs in your neighborhood, any crime that somebody either sees or hears of, more than likely they're not going to pick up the phone and dial 911 so that that crime can get addressed. Whoever committed it can get caught and off the street. So if they end up turning their head the other way, closing the blinds and saying whatever, what does that look like? Well, then that looks like the criminal who committed the crime getting away with it and more than likely committing more crimes and maybe even more serious crimes. That means crime goes up, public safety goes down, okay? And that's not good. And so the importance of this is that all of this demonstrates that not ensuring public accountability does not support community development and safety. So it's important that all stakeholders, law enforcement community members, private business, lawmakers, etc., are working together to address public safety challenges. They cannot be siloed, because when they're siloed, crime goes up, public safety goes down, okay? So one last thing I want to highlight with you, and then after this, we'll talk about solutions, and then we're going to go to Q&A, is that you saw that factor, that the sociological study finding that I brought up earlier. I just want to highlight with you that law enforcement have now found a way around that. In other words, they have now found a way to address crime without needing to rely on community members to be in communication with them, to even call them about an incident via 911. And the way they're able to do that is with surveillance technologies, and now artificial intelligence and facial recognition technologies. So what we've seen is, this federal government administration, like I said, they want to increase police contacts, and not positive ones, but they also want to increase the use of AI, the use of facial recognition technology, and the use of surveillance technologies for public safety purposes. What they don't want to support are putting in the proper kind of guardrails to prevent racial disparities, gender disparities, location and age disparities, some of which we saw on the previous slides. And so I have a quick video I'm going to play for you. It's based on a presentation I gave earlier this year in Arizona about this topic of automated enforcement ecosystem, so that you can understand the danger of it and also understand what needs to get done to address it. After the video, we'll come back and talk, and then we'll transition to solutions. Let's first talk about what exactly is automated enforcement and what is an automated enforcement ecosystem, okay? So automated enforcement mechanisms like surveillance technologies and services, facial recognition, and other biometric recognition technologies like eye retina recognition, fingertip recognition, clothes recognition. There are all kinds of ways that technology can recognize us. In addition to predictive policing technologies and services, and the application of artificial intelligence, AI, to all of these technologies and services, including body-worn cameras, which is now a new thing. Body-worn cameras now have AI incorporated into them. That is a hot topic right now. A lot of law enforcement are looking at purchasing them. So all of these different kinds of automated enforcement are becoming the favorite solutions to prevent negative police encounters, given the public's attention on and criticism of law enforcement misconduct, including biased and race-based policing, the shortage in law enforcement staffing nationwide, the public's perception of increased crime across the country, the windfall of money and resources from the federal, state, and local governments and private sources like police foundations to state and local law enforcement, and calls to prohibit or even restrict law enforcement traffic stops, and to replace armed law enforcement with unarmed civilians for traffic stops. As a result of this situation and the ongoing challenge faced by law enforcement agencies nationwide to hire and retain officers, law enforcement is turning to technology as a colorblind alternative to help solve crime. A lot of law enforcement believe that technology could identify and enforce laws without any association to race, gender, or ethnicity. They also believe that if programmed correctly in regards to behaviors, robotic forms of policing, whether they be unmanned aerial drones, fixed cameras, or robots, should be implemented and accepted. The collateral benefits that are being advertised are improved officer safety, reduced incidents of use of force. So the reason why I wanted to put this kaleidoscope of different kinds of automated enforcement technologies and services here for you to visualize is so that you can get an idea of what exactly law enforcement and other municipal and state government agencies are using to form what I call an ecosystem, right? It's not just one piece of surveillance technology, it's multiple pieces. And that to me is wonderful when we're talking about trying to solve crimes, but it's problematic when you, the taxpayer, don't know what data are they collecting, who's collecting the data, what are they going to do with the data, who are they sharing it with, are they selling the data, who's buying the data, These are all questions that should be asked in a democracy where if you're paying for something, you have a say over how they are going to serve you, right? You go to McDonald's, you go to Goldman Sachs, you go to a car dealership. If somebody that works there is giving you a nasty attitude, you have every right to say, I want to talk to your supervisor, file a complaint. When it comes to law enforcement and the use of these technologies, and even other city government entities and state government entities, because there are no official laws on the books to govern this stuff, they're just using it, and there's no clear way to file a complaint, no clear way to get accountability, to get transparency on how your tax dollars are being used. And so this is where the automated enforcement ecosystem is at play and can also be problematic. But if you have the proper democratic processes in place, can also help you to solve crimes and other public safety challenges. So that's what we're going to talk about today. How can something like this become something more beneficial rather than detrimental for a community by utilizing democratic processes? So, like I said, there's a lot of different kinds of technologies that are being used now, some of which you know of, like license plate readers, speed light cameras, red light cameras. Now there's unmanned drones up in the air. You also have gunshot detection technology like ShotSpotter. All of these technologies are constantly collecting data, if it's through visual or through your hearing, like if it's like an audio sensor picking up, audio, picking up sounds, or visual where it's picking up, video. And so at the end of the day, if you don't have a law in the books that governs the purchase, acquisition, when I say acquisition, that means borrowing, a piece of technology from another government entity. So you have to have a law in the books, a local law preferably, if not state, that would govern the purchase, acquisition, and use of these technologies, not only by law enforcement, because it's not only law enforcement using it, right? The fire department's using it. Parking enforcement is using it. Sanitation and recs is using it, right? All the parks and rec, sanitation, they're all using these technologies. The problem is that all they have on the books, like in Kalamazoo with KDPS, who also uses these technologies, is a policy, a departmental policy, which is not a democratic law, okay? Policy is something that whoever is your police chief, whoever's the head of that agency, if it's your sheriff, whoever, whenever they decide, oh, well, COVID's happening, so it's a new situation, we're going to change the policy. Or if, let's say, they step down or they leave their position, they get a new chief, a new sheriff, a new director of a state, a local government entity. That person can come in and say, I have a different vision for this organization. So we're going to change that policy as of today. In other words, there's no open meetings law requirement. There's no public comment requirement, right? There's no democratic processes that are required in order for that policy to be created or to be revised. And that's the difference between a departmental policy rather than a law. When you have a local law in the books, you have to have public comment. You have to adhere to the open meetings law, okay? You have to provide for public records request, et cetera. So I just want to make sure that as these technologies are being invested in, especially by the federal government for state and local police to use, and also as these technologies are expanding in use, we also want to make sure that the laws on the books are being created to govern the purchase and use of them. Because if that doesn't happen, like I showed you earlier, we're already seeing what's going on with law enforcement killing civilians and engaging with them on a national scale, especially Black Americans. So what that means is if you have AI, which we know is mostly bias, we've seen that even recently, because it's pulling stuff off the internet, a lot of bias on the internet, and it's also, however it's coded, if that person is not checking their implicit and explicit biases when they're coding it, their biases are going to be coded into the way the AI operates, okay? We know facial recognition technology has already been shown to have a high likelihood of misidentifying women, young people, elderly people, and people of color. So if you're a woman of color, more than likely it's going to say, oh, you have a warrant out for your arrest. Guess what? It's not you, it's another Black woman. Okay. And that's already happened actually in Detroit, Michigan. And there have been lawsuits around that. Okay. With the Detroit Police Department using facial recognition technology. So we know that these technologies have and will going forward have or will continue to advance racial disparities and increase racial disparities in gender and location, et cetera, disparities. The problem is we're not putting the proper democratic safeguards in place to prevent it and make sure the public, the taxpayer, has a way to be engaged and say, we don't like it, we want to discontinue it. So that's just something I want to highlight. One other thing to highlight is that it's not only law enforcement using this. You know, all these other government agencies are using it. I know in Grand Rapids, your next door neighbor, they're already, the fire department's using unmanned drones, the police department's using them, and now they're having the parking enforcement potentially using unmanned drones, okay? So this is expanding to other city government entities, and if you don't have a local law on the books, then it's gonna be really hard for you to be on top of what they're doing and be able to rail it, bring it in when they are violating people's rights, okay? So on that note, that now brings us to, toward the end of this presentation. We're going to start winding down. We're going to talk about what are the solutions. So as I said earlier, I work with communities across the country on advancing the CAP method. As you can see here on this slide, the CAP method consists of 3 components. Each component must be achieved in order for the CAP method to be successful. The first component is community empowerment, which entails community members, especially those who live in neighborhoods where there's both high levels of crime and a history of high levels of negative police interactions like racial profiling, excessive use of force, etc. Those particular community members living in those zip codes, those blocks, those areas where both things are happening at the same time, both things are intersecting, need to be involved in, need to have knowledge of, and need to have direct decision-making authority over all direct police-civilian interactions like stops, arrests, uses of force, surveillance technology, the way that protests are being handled, etc. And the reason being is that the people closest to the problems are also the people closest to the solutions. So if we want to see long-term change for long-term problems, then we have to make sure that the people most directly impacted by community development and safety challenges are at the helm of decision-making, working with law enforcement and other community safety stakeholders as one community. The next component is accountability, and this involves creating an inhospitable environment for those who engage in misconduct by establishing both internal and external accountability mechanisms that work together. And then the last component is transparency, which I define as the interconnectedness and coordination amongst what I call the 4 aspects of the community, as you're going to see here on the next slide. And so first we have law enforcement. That includes the sheriff's office, state and local police. Then we have elected and appointed government officials. This also includes government employees. Then we have community members. This includes directly impacted individuals, direct service providers, community-based organizations, faith-based organizations and leaders, and private business, etc. And then last but not least, we have the local press and news media. So according to my definition of transparency, all 4 of these aspects of the community would need to work together as one community to support community development and safety and ensure public accountability through more so proactive rather than reactive strategies. So what does that really look like? I know I've said a lot. It sounds nice, but I want to just play this short video for you where you'll see how I've been able to work with different communities around the country on applying the CAP method with interactive technology to be able to solve public safety challenges. And so when I say interactive technology, I mean technology that allows individuals to have discussions to solve these kinds of challenges using your cell phone, using your Wi-Fi device like a cell phone, a tablet, a laptop, rather than chalkboard and easel paper, okay? And so by doing that, it's more accessible. You have more people that can participate if it's in person, virtual, hybrid, and because when the answers are submitted via the Wi-Fi device, what shows up on the screen are the answers. What does not show up on the screen are who submitted the answers. It's all anonymous. So that allows people that are participating to be more honest, be more candid, and when you get more information from them, you're able to come up with more comprehensive solutions. So I'm gonna play this short video, and then we're gonna start wrapping up.
He is a civil rights attorney. He does police reform and training, as I mentioned, public safety as well, to police departments around the country. We're so happy to have him join us. Carlton, I'll give it to you. You take it away. We're all learning from you right now.
It's like Twitter. So when you submit the answer in real time, the answer is up on the screen that we all can see. What is not on the screen, as what Tanisha just mentioned, is your name. It's all anonymous, okay? And the more that people submit the same answer, the bigger that the words appear on the screen. And so that's why you'll see some words that are bigger than others. It's giving us in real time a gauge of what people's opinions are related to the question. So we have 50 seconds left. When we end, I'll come back to you and we'll go through the responses. Thank you.
So I wanted to point out, like, for exhausted, like, I do really heavily agree with that, because it's every day I go on social media or like TikTok and I see these videos of incidents where there's people, like, you know, they interact with cops, it always goes wrong, where they end up getting arrested, or in the cops seeing the bad light, or the person seeing the bad light.
All right.
Really appreciate y'all having this conversation, man. It was needed.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you.
It was needed.
There were some other ones here. Great, awesome, excellent session. Excellent. Want to do this again. Great conversation. Had a great time. Amazing webinar. Phenomenal session. Please do this again. And very informative. This was so informative. Excellent information and dialogue and educational. What have you experienced as a barrier to police accountability? We got 2 minutes, so I'm going to let y'all send your responses for the next 2 minutes, and then when it's done, we're going to come back and have a conversation about it, all right?
And I have watched the police, even though they're kind and caring, they do not know how to deal with people who have mental health issues or in the middle of a crisis, whether they're exact or not, whether they're nonverbal or whether they're acting out. So they don't get enough training, and it's not their fault. Y'all don't give them enough training to deal with people who have mental health issues. Their job is to protect and serve, and they treat mental health patients like criminals because they don't know anything different. And I'm not blaming them. I'm blaming the training or the structure that should have a mental health professional when you get a mental health call.
Other city decision makers, not just the council, as far as I can tell, they're not hearing or they're not listening to the kinds of comments that I'm hearing in this room about, for instance, the disparity between neighborhoods and so forth. So I don't think they're really understanding where the issues are.
But thank you so much. It's been wonderful.
Yes, I would like to give you Colton a hand. Delighted to have you here. Fantastic call.
Thank you. And for you as well.
I think that it's so important to have positive interactions with youth. And make sure that we are connecting with them in times when they're not under duress, we're not under duress, because then we can have some of these conversations and break down these barriers. If we want to make some of these changes moving forward, it's important for them to have a relationship with us where they feel, one, like we are here for everybody in the city, which we are.
Yeah.
And two, that they can come to us at any point and report these kind of things, because that's how we prevent tragedies moving forward.
Absolutely. I love it, Erin. Well, listen, thank you so much for being here.
I thought tonight was very beneficial and important for us. So we can speak up and use our voice, change our community day by day. Because we are the future of tomorrow.
All right. So with that video, you got, to kind of see how the CAP method works. You got to hear from people that participated in those sessions and see in different communities how using the CAP method with interactive technology is one way that you could start to come up with solutions for what's going to happen for fiscal year 2025, 26, 27, and 28 and beyond, as we're seeing the federal funding cuts and other issues around community police relations going forward. Now, I do want to just real quick, I want to wrap up. I'm just going to last 5 minutes here. I want to just say that there's 2 resources that I want to just highlight that you can find on my website. One is the quick exposure checklist and CAP method one-pager. This is a sample of it. If you go to my website, www.mayorsolutions.com, go on the resources webpage, you will find it there. You can download it for free. Essentially what this does, it provides guidance to identify, collect, and analyze existing federal funds for Kalamazoo community stakeholders, being local government, courts, organizations, and contact them, and or research funds allocations on federal government agencies' websites. So that way you can start to collect information on which organizations are relying on federal funds, which federal funds are they relying on, and that way you have a list of that. You can know who's been receiving that money from last year through this year, and then know, okay, what does that look like going into next year? Now that we've heard this information during this webinar, how can we track potentially the money not being there in 2026 and 2027? The other thing is that this one-pager provides guidance to identify and map ARPA funds budgeting from now until December 31st of next year. So consider that the funds might get recouped, might get clawed back before December 31st of 2026. So we know that Kalamazoo is doing a lot with ARPA money. That's very important for your community. So you want to make sure that you, once again, download this one pager and use it to create a timeline as to, okay, we know we have the money for this thing. We know that this project's supposed to last this amount of time, but we know the money might run out, or they might take it back before then. So how can we plan now to maybe have other money come in to replace that money, just in case that money's not there anymore, so that the programming is still ongoing, okay? And then the last thing is that this one pager provides guidance to create a chart detailing expectations for federal funding for the next 6 to 18 months, or 6 months to a year and a half. I think that's a good time to kind of figure out what's going to happen. How can we prepare for it? For instance, have the funds been canceled or recouped already? If not, were all expected funds received? And can the federal funds be replaced by state, local, private, etc. funds? Okay. Understand that, and I mean, you don't have to use this stuff, but understand that if you're not being more proactive rather than reactive when it comes to this, the only other option really is to deal with the lack of funding once it happens, which is going to really go into effect next year. And this is, in my opinion, a more reactive rather than a proactive approach. So I would, encourage you to not do that, and instead try to download this one pager and use it to create your chart and timeline and start figuring out who has what, who's losing what, how can we fill in the gaps, how can we prepare if we're not able to fill in the gaps. And then last but not least, and you could also use the CAP method with interactive technology to help you come up with that plan after you have the one pager. One other thing is, when it comes to surveillance technology, like I said earlier, you need to get a law in the books. I worked with the city of Grand Rapids and also with community members there to get that law in the books there. It was ratified 3 years ago, and now it's been in place. It provides for community members to be involved in the purchase and the use of the technology before it's purchased. It's also allows for civilian oversight to audit the use of the technology every year and produce an annual surveillance report laying out if there were any violations of the use of the technology, violations of civil rights, civil liberties, any complaints filed against use of technology that year, how much money was spent on it, etc. And all that data will be broken down when it comes to the civil rights liberties that are violated and complaints. We've broken down by race, gender, and location. And so know that since the ratification of that law, there have been 2 annual surveillance reports that you can find on the city's website. You can access it anywhere in the world, and 0 lawsuits. Okay. The reason for that is because we use the CAP method, from negotiating the language through the ratification through the implementation of this law. The CAP method has made sure that directly impacted people were involved in every step of the way. And I think that's why we've had 2 reports, 0 lawsuits. So once again, you could use the CAP method with interactive technology to come up with your own language, Kalamazoo, for your city, for your county, for your townships, so that now you have your law and you're not just relying on departmental policy that can change with one person. You have a law that requires democratic processes. On that note, thank you so much. Please do keep in touch. You can go to www.mayorsolutions.org with 2 S's to reach out to me and get more information. You could also reach me at email empower@mayorsolutions.org. You could also find me on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And so once again, thank you. And don't forget, our motto is, the process reflects the outcome, not a one-size-fits-all approach. So thank you, and please do stay in touch.